We're on page 98. And I'm going to highlight this word defined, because it comes up a fair bit, and almost every time it comes up, a student goes, what does this mean? So if you get a question that says and asks where a variable is defined, it is basically asking, when is it possible? What is the domain? Some x values might be allowed. Which ones are they? And it doesn't have to be x. The variable could be any. So answering the question, when is it possible, is sort of like also asking, and this is probably what I think more often, is it ever not possible? Because there's some things in math we're not allowed to do. And we're developing them, right? You start off in kindergarten, they let you do anything with math. You can add and subtract forever. But all of a sudden you got to dividing, and dividing was the first place that you ever learned there was something you were not allowed to do that never worked. What can't you divide by? Zero. Can't divide by zero. Causes all sorts of problems. So that became the number one thing you weren't allowed to do in math. And then we got to square roots, and you learned another thing you're not allowed to do. What can't you square root? Can you square root 0? Yeah, square root of 0 is fine. But negative numbers. Can't square root negative numbers. So when a question like this is asking where is it defined, it's really asking, do we ever run into these problematic things? And so far, we have dividing by 0 and square root of negatives. And we're going to later learn you also can't take logarithms of negatives, but you haven't ever done a logarithm. There's other things that aren't allowed in math, but we're slowly getting to those. So when we're asking when things are possible, we're asking a domain question, and it's often easier to ask the opposite, is it ever not possible? Look at A. Can you put a value of x inside there to make the inside negative? Is it ever going to be negative inside? Because that would be bad. Or is it always positive inside? So let's try a number. Is it okay to plug in 2 for x? You get 2 squared is 4, 4 times 27, like 108. Can you square root of 108 on your calculator? Yes, you could get an answer. Okay. So 2 would be fine. Is there ever a number that you plug in there that would be bad? What about 0? You get square root of 0. That would be okay. You're allowed to square root 0. What if I plug a negative number in? Like negative 1. Will it be negative inside? No, because the negative 1 squared will make it positive, right? So we start thinking about, is it ever not possible? Would you agree in this one there's no bad values for x? So then in A, we would say for which variables is it defined? It's defined for everything. We would write, it always works, negative infinity to infinity. It's always defined. Right? And usually, in this question, right, in this question here, is it ever not possible? Things to check. We're going to check positives and negatives, because that's where things usually change for square roots. Often, with dividing by 0, you have to check 0. These are things you're going to check when you're asking, when are things possible? when are things not possible? For B. Okay? We can't square root a negative, we can't fourth root a negative, we can't sixth root a negative. If it's a cube root, a fifth root, you can do cube roots of anything, positive or negative. So cube roots are really easy because the answer would always be everything. So now, I have a fourth root. There's already a negative in here. So the first thing we have to be like, when is it not possible? Is it always not possible?
No, because if x was also a negative, they would turn it into a positive.
That's right. If x is also negative, and that negative gets cubed, it still would be a negative. And then that negative would hit the positive. So just a note from that. A little bit of examining the question, you would say all negative numbers are good, right? Can you see that the positive numbers would be bad? What about 0? Is 0 okay in this one? What happens if you plug in 0? You're going to get the fourth root of 0. And the fourth root of 0 is 0. So we would say in this one that it is defined when x is less than or equal to 0. Okay? Or you could write this in interval notation. Remember interval notation from grade 10? Another way of saying the same thing. So you could go, if you want less than or equal to 0, you start at negative infinity, include everything up to 0, and we use the square bracket to say 0 is included. And sometimes you'll see, like, if you write it x less than or equal to 0, it'll be accepted in grade 11 and grade 12. Sometimes you'll see the more formal way, they add like these fancy squiggle brackets, and they say all x values, and then they write a line such that x is less than or equal to 0. And sometimes they'll even put a comma and define that the x values belong to the real numbers. I just want to show you the long way. I'm never going to ask you to write it, but sometimes it shows up on multiple choice questions. And then you're sort of like, what does all this extra stuff mean? So the extra stuff means that we're looking at x values. This line means such that the x values follow this rule, that they have to be less than or equal to 0. And sometimes it also includes, oh, the x values belong to all the numbers. So you might get a question where they just want integers. And as you get into higher level math, you have more things to define. I'll give you one more. What about square root? And just because we use x, we'll do some different letters. How about 8 plus 3? What's allowed, what's not allowed? Let's start off with, all right, we'll start off with telling me something that's allowed. James, pick a volunteer. Yeah, something that's allowed. You pick another person. You're the only person that has the possibility of not answering this question. Oh, okay. Because you can pick anybody else. Megan, can you tell me, if we were making a list of things that were possible and not possible, what's an A value that you could plug in that would be okay to use? 9. 9 would work because 9 plus 3 is 12, and we're allowed to square root 12 and push that on our calculator. Tell me a value that is not possible. Now, Megan, you get to pick the next person. Now, oh, Destiny. Negative 4 would be bad. Because negative 4 would give you the square root of negative 1. That would be bad. Another possible one and another impossible one. So Destiny, pick another volunteer. They're not really volunteering, are they? Lucas, oh.
Possible.
Yeah.
2.
2. Because then you get the square root of 5. And one more not possible. Pick the last person.
Pick last person. Adam.
Ah.
-20.
-20. Yeah. Because then you have the square root of -17. Not possible. So we want to say all of them that are possible. Doing a couple gives you an idea. But how do we write all of them that are possible? It looks like bigger numbers are, smaller negative numbers aren't, so it looks like we have to say that the a values have to be bigger than or equal to something. And this time, it's a negative number, which kind of makes us feel like, oh, something went wrong, but it's not, because if you plugged in -3, you get the 0. And 0 is where it changes from being positive numbers to being negative numbers. So in this one, it would be defined when a is bigger than or equal to -3. Okay, circle question number 6.